And I want to ask you a question, a couple questions, and then I want to give you my best guess at an answer. The question is, what makes some teams more successful than others? Why are some teams more innovative than others? Why are some teams more collaborative than others? Why do some teams win more often than others? Teams like, Lithuanian basketball team beating the American basketball team years ago. Why does that happen? Well, as an organizational psychologist, I've been studying this question for decades. And as a writer, I've been able to collect stories of successful teams and what made them so successful when the odds were stacked against them. And I've also come across a lot of misconceptions about answers to that question. So before I give you the answer of why some teams are more successful than others, let me tell you what the answer is not. The first answer that most people assume that it is talent. That if we just collect a team of talented individuals, we'll beat teams of less talented individuals, and that's true some of the time. But that can also lead to people spending way too much money and putting together a team of people where everyone wants to be the star, and as a result, the team doesn't collaborate, it falls apart. We see this all of the time in sports, but we see it in the literature on companies as well. Several studies now show that when you pay top dollar for a talented individual, you bring them into your firm and you ignore how well they're going to fit into your firm, not only does the performance of that star player decline, the whole performance of the team they're on declines. The way that I put this is that talent isn't portable. We can't take it with us because it's affected so much by the team that you're on. The other thing about talent, though, even if it was portable, it's kind of hard, right? It's kind of hard to move talent around. I mean, assume you could, right? How many of you think you could go to HR or you could go to your boss and you could just say, hey, I need 30,000 euros addition to this salary in order to keep this talented player? Anybody think they could get away with that? Okay, it looks like less than half. Less than half, okay. And then recruiting people is difficult too, right? But first you'd have to get rid of the untalented players. You'd have to fire well, actually, let's not use fire. You'd have to invite them to be successful on a different team in order to get that space. And how many of you have the ability to do that all that often? You really can't, right? So talent isn't portable. That leads us with another misconception, though, because if you can't acquire top talent and bring them into your team, then you focus on team building. You focus on, let's get the team together, let's come together, let's go to an off-site where we do a ropes course, or we go through some activity, or let's take a personality test and find out that we're all different colors or different letters and what that means. But even here, the research is really lacking. What we find is that unless an off-site experience or unless a personality test, unless some intervention like that is directly related to the work that we do on a regular basis, unless it changes the habits and the norms of behavior of what we do at the office or the virtual office, then it doesn't necessarily take an effect. It's usually a waste of money and a waste of time, because team building is not an activity. Team building is a habit. It's a habit. It's a thing that your team does on a regular basis. It's the norms of behavior, the norms of communication, the way they communicate with trust and respect. It's a habit. But we already have a word for the habits and norms of behavior among a group of people. We don't necessarily need this word team building. We have a word for this habit. We call that word culture, the culture of the team. And when you look across all of the research for the last 20 years, the research is strongly suggestive that it's the culture of the team that explains which ones are successful and which ones fail, which ones, regardless of top talent, can outperform what our expectations are. And specifically, it's a very specific culture. When you look at the research on top-performing teams and their culture, you find that that culture has 3 elements. That culture is marked by a sense of common understanding, psychological safety, and pro-social purpose. You don't have to take a picture of the slide yet. I'll show you the one you can take a picture of. I like your enthusiasm, though. So let's define some terms. Common understanding. This is the extent to which team members have a commonly held perspective on the team's expertise, assigned tasks, their roles and responsibilities, their knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's funny, that rhymed, and I didn't intend to. Their context they're working in, their work preferences. How well do we know each other? what's expected of each other, but also the soft things about each other. This includes the personality dynamic. How do we know when someone is making a request for help and when they just want to vent? I learned this out. I've been married for almost 2 decades now. I learned this really quickly. I needed to know very quickly when my wife just wanted to vent and have me respond with, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and when she wanted me to fix it, right? I mean, I would try and fix it most of the time, and later I'd learn that what she actually wants is, "Oh, that must be really hard," right? Common understanding. My favorite example of common understanding on a team is the way that the astronaut Chris Hadfield led his team in the ISS. Now, you may know Chris Hadfield as the mustached Canadian guy who sings all the songs and films all the videos that get put on YouTube, right? He's the guy who did the David Bowie cover, et cetera. But in the space community, he's known as one of the most successful commanders of an ISS mission ever. And the reason is that he focused on common understanding. He led a team of 3 very different cultures. Himself, a Canadian, 2 Russian cosmonauts, and 2 Americans. 3 very different cultures, 3 very different languages, right? English, Russian, American, 3 very different languages. And yet he sought to build common understanding. He did that by going above and beyond, moving in with the Russian cosmonauts, learning Russian, drinking a lot of vodka, right? Moving in with the Americans, learning American, learning their norms and behaviors, drinking a lot of, I don't know, Coca-Cola? He even took the team so far as to have them role play how they would respond in certain scenarios. Like, how would you respond if one of us found out that a family member died while we were on the International Space Station circling the Earth? Which actually happened during their mission. One of the astronauts' family members passed away, and the only people they had to comfort him were the other members of the team. But they could do it because they had built common understanding. Now, you might not be going to space. Actually, you probably will in your lifetime. We learned all about that innovation today. But you can build common understanding on your team. Here's my favorite way to do it. Here's my best advice for you on how to build common understanding. Start with a huddle. I use this term huddle. It's a term I use for circling the team together on a regular basis. Could be every day, could be every week, could be about every other week. Some teams do it once a month, but that's kind of a stretch. And just get the team together and have them report to each other, not to you, the leader, but to each other. What did I just work on? What am I focused on next? And what's blocking my progress? Now, if you're in the world of agile software development, you recognize these as the 3 questions of the daily stand-up. But this doesn't have to be daily, and it doesn't have to be standing. It's just a time for the team to, what I call, work out loud, to get together and broadcast to each other, this is what I'm working on. And that last question is most important. What's blocking my progress? Because the last question is where we build common understanding. It's where we ask for help without having to feel like we're failing. It's where we can broadcast what our actual strengths and weaknesses are. It's where we can broadcast where we have some fears. It's where we build that sense of common understanding. Okay, so that's common understanding. Let's talk about psychological safety. This is the extent to which members of a team feel safe to express themselves and to take risks. They feel safe to speak up. They feel safe to disagree. They know that they'll be listened to even when they disagree. They know that they can fully express themselves. And we talk a lot now about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talk a lot about that, and we should. We need to. But the truth is, without psychological safety, no amount of diversity matters. If you build a diverse team of people from different backgrounds and perspectives and genders, if you build that and no one feels free to express themselves, then you don't get the benefit of all those diverse perspectives. You get people trying to figure out how to say what's socially acceptable, and that's it. And my favorite example of building psychological safety is the way Alan Mulally turned around the senior leadership team at the Ford Motor Company from a team at a company that was losing $17 billion a year to a team that was actually profiting about $6 to $7 billion a year before he retired. And he did that by building psychological safety, by committing to honesty. In fact, on his first day, the very first press conference to announce him as the leader, remember, of the Ford Motor Company, he was asked in the press, Mr. Mulally, what kind of car do you drive? And he said, I drive a Lexus. It's the finest car on the market. What? You drive a Lexus? Well, so did every other senior leader on the team. They just didn't admit it because it wasn't socially acceptable. What Mulally was saying was, I drive the best car on the market, and I aspire to take our company there. But let's be honest, we're not there yet. And we need to feel free to speak up mind in order to get there. He also instituted a regular meeting with the senior leaders. He called it a business process review, where every Thursday morning they got together in the boardroom and they talked about what they were working on. They talked about what they had completed, what they were focused on next, and what was blocking their progress. If this sounds like a huddle, it's because it's exactly like a huddle. It is a huddle. And he asked them to color code their progress reports. Green would mean everything is great, yellow would mean we have some problems, but we know how to fix them, and red would mean I have a problem and I have no idea what's going on. And in this stiff, rigid, bureaucratic culture where you can't even say what car you drive for fear of getting fired for not driving the right one, guess what he saw in the very first business process review with his new senior leadership team? Everything's fine. Everybody's great. No one's going to stick their neck out and say, I have a problem, because they fear they might get fired. And it took 8 weeks of green light, green light, green light, green light for Alan Mulally to say, guys, we're going to lose $17 billion this year. And you're telling me everything's fine? Finally, one executive took a risk and decided to say something that was wrong. Mark Fields, who ran a production plant in Ontario, Canada, had problems with the manufacturing that were causing the need for repairs, and the repairs weren't coming fast enough, so the cars were building up on the lot and not able to be shipped. And Mark Fields took a risk and came to a meeting and changed his deck to red. And you can imagine what happened. Everybody stared. Oh, that's the last we're going to see of Mark. Whew, right? But Alan Mulally instead wiped everything else clean and said, this is great. Let's get focused on what's wrong. Thank you for admitting what's wrong. Now we can solve it. Until we have psychological safety, we can't solve problems because we won't admit what they are. And so they worked on his problem, and the next week when they came to the business process review, when they came to the meeting, the executives came into the room and they found that Mark was sitting right next to Alan, the guy with the problem, right next to the CEO, sending the message, we can talk about what's not working. Now, the week after they saw him sitting next to the CEO, you can imagine what happened, right? Finally, we got some color. We have some honest conversation. And we need that honest conversation on all of our teams. So how do we do that? Well, as a leader of your team, you may not need to color code everything, but what you can do is encourage dissent, encourage people to speak up, amplify it, like through a megaphone. And pay attention to the way in which you're asking for it, right? Because we have this tendency when we lead teams, when we lead discussions, we have this tendency to just monologue, to just say what we think, and then go, questions, comments, concerns? We just tag it on to the end. It's kind of like, you know when you're at a wedding and the priest says, speak now or forever hold your peace, and then nobody says anything. Because you know you're not supposed to say anything. You know that it's just a performance. Well, we need to change that. Instead of saying, does anyone have any questions? What if we flipped and we said, what questions do you have? Hey, I know that we're leading this discussion. I know that I have my perspective, my knowledge, skills, and abilities, which means I have my biases. So what did I miss? Can someone help me see around that corner? What questions do you have for me? You can go a long way to building psychological safety just by assuming that you're not perfect. And as a result, people need to disagree with you. And by the way, you're not perfect. And as a result, people need to disagree with you. So we build common understanding, we build psychological safety, and lastly, we need to build pro-social purpose. This is a specific term. Pro-social purpose is the extent to which members feel they make a contribution towards work that benefits others. Benefits others being the key thing. Do we know who is helped by the work that we do? Could be a customer, stakeholder, society, who? We know from the research and motivation that pro-social motivation, motivation to help other people, is one of our strongest motivators. It's the reason we survived as a species, because we seek to help other people. And so if you're looking to motivate your team, to inspire them, don't talk about grandiose vision things. Don't talk about growth. Talk about people. Who is helped by the work that we do? A great example of this is the firm KPMG. In the United States, they had a problem with their level of employee satisfaction and their level of employee motivation. So they launched this campaign that they called the We Shape History campaign. And they talked about the way that, it's KPMG, they're a Big Four accounting firm. Let's be honest, it's boring. It's accounting. Yeah, she agrees with me. You must work in marketing. It's apologies to the accountants, right? But come on, hard to feel purpose. But they said, that we've been involved throughout our history in pivotal events throughout human history. So they launched this thing called the We Shaped History campaign. And they talked about the way in which when the Lend-Lease Act, which was the way that the United States entered World War II by lending supplies, weapons, resources to the Allies, when that came into effect, do you know who managed all of the contracts and the logistics? It was us. It was KPMG. And when Nelson Mandela was let out of prison and allowed to run for president, became the first black president of South Africa, do you know who certified the elections in South Africa? It was KPMG. And after 9/11, when the tragedy struck and we had to build back New York, we had to put things together, do you know who managed the insurance contracts and the cleanup logistics and got people, not got their life back, but at least helped them mourn and helped them cope? Do you know who did that? It was us. So they launched the We Shape History campaign. They designed posters like this to talk about the way they were involved in pivotal moments in history. And then they launched the 10,000 Stories Challenge, which was, tell us what you do here. Tell us how you help people. And they created an app where people could make their own posters about the way that they helped farmers grow by working with credit unions and allowing for lending, or the way that they helped stop cybercrime by helping with forensic accounting and other security measures. They wanted 10,000 stories of individuals seeing their purpose through accounting. They got over 30,000 stories. And they got that change in their motivation, their change in employee satisfaction. But here's what's really interesting. That entire change was driven, when they looked at the data, by the answer to one question. In the employee satisfaction survey, they asked the question, how much do you agree or disagree with the statement, my team leader regularly communicates our purpose? And that made all the difference. 90% plus of people who could answer that question in the affirmative felt purpose and motivation at work, and only 60% who couldn't answer that question felt it. Huge difference. So that's my challenge to you. Can you answer this who on your team? Can you point to who is helped by the work that we do? Can you introduce people to the very people who are helped, bringing customers in, or sharing positive reviews from customers, or sharing internal thank yous from senior leaders, forwarding them on to your team and saying, great job. You should never be at a loss for what to tell your team when they ask who is helped by the work that we do. You should always be able to point to, this is what we're doing this for. Sometimes I say, this is who we're fighting for. You should always be able to answer that, and you'll build pro-social purpose. And if you build that, if you build common understanding, psychological safety, and pro-social purpose, you'll find something amazing starts to happen. Because these aren't just three pillars, they interact, they intersect. When you build common understanding, not quite yet, I'll tell you. When you build common understanding and you build pro-social purpose, you start to attract talent. You start to get the best people working for you. And when you build common understanding and you build psychological safety, you start to get their best ideas because they feel free to speak up. And when you build psychological safety and you build pro-social purpose, those same people give you their best effort. Now you can take a picture. When you build common understanding, psychological safety, and pro-social purpose, you get a team that is more successful. You get a team that is more collaborative. You get a team that succeeds more often. You get what I like to call the best team ever. Thank you all so much for having me.